Webinar started. Hi, guys. Well, welcome to the ins and out of content distribution and AVOD monetization on third-party platforms. Thank you all for joining. Today, we have an exciting panel. With a group of really esteemed gentlemen. I'm going to start by introducing each of you, and then we'll go into a little bit of an introduction, and we will kick it off with the not Q&A. We'll kick it off with the questions. We'll move into a Q&A, and throughout that time, we're going to throw out a couple of polls to the audience. So first, I'd like to introduce Jhod Cardinal. He's a VP of distribution at dotstudioPRO, and he heads up the distribution and aggregation, and he really focuses on how content owners can really use technology to really monetize their assets. Next, we have Brian Lacey. Hi, Brian. Nice to see you. He's the owner of
Phoenix.
Hi. He's the owner of America's Dumbest Criminals catalog, and he is joining us today, and he's really going to be able to share insights with us on how you take a successful library of content out into the content distribution world. And then we have Matthew Singerman. Do you sing, Matthew?
You don't, everyone will leave the seminar if I sing, so let's not do that.
Well, I would like to welcome you and thank you for joining. He is a platform program specialist, and he will be really giving us insights into content strategy and how he works with his clients in the content world. And this is really set out to be a really fun panel today. So I'm just going to do a little bit of an introduction. My name is Phoenix Gonzalez. I am one of the co-founders at dotstudioPRO. I will be moderating this panel today, and we will be exploring content distribution in 2023. We are going to focus on strategies on different platforms, what you should be looking for in distribution technology partners, how to position your content library and your catalog. Do you have enough content to make a go at fast? Is VOD, like video on demand, MRSS delivery, still lucrative? And also, we're going to really look at what are the new trends and alternative means of distribution and what avenues of monetization there are as we come into the second half of 2023. So again, thank you, gentlemen. We're going to start with our first question, and I'm going to just kind of leave this open, and you guys can just jump in and, let us know what your thoughts are. So, as we look at the content landscape today and what distribution really looks like, I mean, there's been such an evolution of content distribution. What is the difference between content distribution, aggregation, and syndication? It's such a confusing landscape. People are always getting confused, and I really feel like it's an opportunity for us to really talk about what those three pillars are.
Yeah, sure. I can jump into there. We've discussed this a lot internally at dotstudioPRO, and I think briefly, content distribution and aggregation, I feel a lot of us do understand well, and it's the syndication that gets a little tricky because it has different connotations depending on the time frame. So the content distribution is simply, in my opinion, just how you're getting your content out through all the different windows, whether it's theatrical, TVOD, AVOD, your first run sales to SVOD or broadcasters. And is your distribution partner also doing the marketing? Are they putting together the posters, the trailers, and all that such? So it's a lot larger aspect of the full content scope of how your film's getting out there or your TV series. And then I just say aggregation is, bringing that together using either a third-party company or yourself to somehow bring similar types of genres, content together, making sure you have all the tech specs and all the delivery metadata available so that you can start that big push out into the markets, depending on what your strategy is going to be. And then it's the syndication part. All of us probably have had some experience with the older syndication, which is more like the broadcast side, where that was, you needed 100+ episodes, and you would use these individual broadcasters across the US and try and syndicate to as many of these broadcasters and create ad revenue. But in the new AVOD space, it's more like platform syndication, and it's how are you sending it to multiple platforms as simply, as quickly, as cost effective as possible. So sending to Pluto, Tubi, Zumo, and literally the hundreds and I guess even thousands now worldwide.
Yeah. And just before I go to Matthew and Brian, I just want everybody to know I did launch a poll on what is the size of your content library. That's really going to help us as we go through this today. So there is a poll that is kind of flashing on the right-hand side somewhere down there that you want to jump in and let us know what your size of library. Matthew and Brian, thoughts on you know, the differentiating.
Look, I think Jhod did a good job of explaining differentiating. I think the key to that though is, what is your strategy? Right? What are you going to do? What is most important to you? Do you need to get your library to someone else for a bigger aggregation to sell and combine forces? Or are you focused on distributing your own content directly or having someone distribute it? What is going to be the best leverage points for you to make the most money? And I think, you know, that's really what you talked about are certainly the definitions important, but even more important is how do you activate on all those things? And I think it depends on a lot of different factors.
Well, I like that you did that, that you actually went there, because that's actually the second question. How do I know who's the best person, company / technology to help me monetize my content? And, you know, because you're a strategist, you know, that's where your mind is. And I really love your mind. And Brian, I think, you know, that is a really good question to kind of start off with you, because, you know, you are a content library owner who is, you know, going to work with a Matthew and a Jhod to really come up with what's going to make sense to monetize your library.
Well, to follow up on Matthew and Jhod's comments, I think at the end of the day, it's about what's your strategy? What do you want to accomplish with your library? In some cases, it's just a matter of squeeze whatever juice you can out of the lemon that who knows how old it might be, how viable it might be. In other cases, you can look at these opportunities as a way to relaunch your brand, relaunch content. So I'll give a classic example with the America's Dumbest Criminal series. Now, this is a series that was taken out in syndication back in 1996, in the old days that Jhod mentioned, where we had to go market by market to sell the program. Right. Okay, so it's been on air, it's been out there on cable, free TV, et cetera, for about 25 years. And at some point, I had to decide, what do I want to do with this content? And speaking with Dot Studio, I came to the realization, hey, here's potentially a good opportunity to put this out for multiple platforms. And initially, I was operating in another world, an older world, and initially my comment was, well, what are they paying for minimum guarantees? And the comment came back, nothing. Don't worry about exclusivity. Get it on as many platforms as you possibly can. It's 26 years old, which we did. And thankfully, from the standpoint as a rights holder, they did a bang-up job for us. And now we're in a position, we're in serious conversation with some major studios to produce new episodes, a whole new season. Now, if you told me this a year ago or 2 years ago even, I would have said, no, just get whatever you can for this.
Right.
Now I'm in conversations with new syndication of the series.
Wow.
And the initial appetite is for over 100 episodes.
That's just
so that shows you the kind of that's incredible. That shows you the kind of life that can be injected into a property by taking advantage of all these platforms. And as you guys know, there are so many of these platforms. Yeah. You know, and my company is a small company, and I made the decision a long time ago. I don't have the contacts. I don't have the time. I've done some sales to Netflix and some other platforms, and the technical requirements drive you crazy. Right. And they get expensive, and they get very expensive. So for me, going with an aggregator made a lot of sense.
25 plus years, the content, that's the shelf life of the content. And you're now in discussions about.
And if you, exactly. And if you told me when I first got involved with this series, 1996, when I first got involved in this series, there's no way, it's very difficult for those of us in the business to understand just what the tail of a property is going to be, what the shelf life is going to be. And if you told me in 1996, this thing is still going to be generating revenues in 2023, I would have said, no, I can't imagine it. But here we are. Here we are.
Well, that poses a really interesting question. So I'm going to go on to number 3, which is, should I focus on AVOD monetization in the on-demand space, or should I consider the fast linear space, or should I be doing both? And while I'm going to end the first poll, I'm going to launch the next poll. And that one, I'd love for everybody to join in on, because it does speak to this question. So I'm going to open it up to you guys. Should I focus on AVOD on-demand monetization, or should I focus on fast linear?
Phoenix, can I ask a quick question as panelists? Can we see that poll? I had the question pop up, but I wasn't able to see if there was.
So we had 40% of people who basically said that they have 0 to 5 hours. We had one person say they had 5 to 20 hours, and we had 2 people, or 40% of people, say that they had 100+ hours. So I can share the results.
Ah, there we go. Thanks.
Yeah. You see that result?
Yeah.
Great. So
I think even just seeing that result, you know, there's a couple people who may be able to start to pull off their own channel just because of the amount of hours they have. Obviously, the 100+. You know, what we're experiencing right now is, if you want to, like, fast channel is extremely valuable. So if you have the ability to create one, I think you want to go down that direction. You either need a brand name that's extremely strong if you don't have a huge amount of content, or you need a large amount of content in, you know, a very defined space. What I'm finding interesting, and Matthew, I'd be curious your opinion of this, is now it feels like it's not just creating the channel, but knowing you can almost bump someone who already has a position on a Roku, for example, because it seems like we're starting to get to the, you know, high end amount of how many channels can be in existence. So if you wanted to do a thriller channel, for example, you have to be better than someone that's already out there, or you might not really get placed. Matthew, what are you
Yeah,
experiencing?
look, I think that's a great point. And I would say, look, and that's kind of what my specialty is. When you have a lot of content, people come to me, brands or companies, and say, hey, let's put a channel together. And that's what I do, is help them put that channel together and use my relationships with the platforms to get them on. And I think, you know, you have to really look, 5 hours is unfortunately not going to cut it for a fast channel. But I think what you guys said, 100 hours plus, then you look at it. I think Jhod is right. Like, yes, do we have the amount of content? But the other thing is, do we have something, like you just said, thriller could be the 100th. Do we have something unique? Like, I've worked and distributed a lot of unique channels, like Black News Channel I did, and got them on 20+ platforms. There was nothing else out there like that, though. So that makes a difference. If you can find your white space, maybe that's fun, Black News Channel white space, but if you can find white space, you know, I'm working with an Asian American news channel right now, and there's not a lot of those. And I've worked with something called True History, which was about lifelong learning and videos they had. So, you know, you could also, but by the way, it doesn't have to be a channel just on a topic. It could also be, if your 100+ hours are a show, and a show that makes sense, like America's Dumbest Criminals, that can also be a channel. So there's the ability to make a channel, but there's also the ability to take a small amount of content like you have and just sell that directly to the platform, and they'll put it on their channel. So I think there's a lot of good options out there for content owners.
Yeah, we had some good success. We partnered with a company, and they had about 70 hours of content, but they were a well-known brand in the action sports space. And that was the leverage, right? That's kind of how I could go to the Rokus and the Plutos and Tubis of the world and say, hey, I have this really great brand, and they have access to all of their consumers. They have 10 million unique hits a month. But we couldn't build out the channel with the content. So we found the distributors with other action content to fill in, action sport content to fill in those holes. So now it's a brand name that's getting recognition. And then it's also, these other distributors are very happy to be attached to this channel because it differentiated them from any other competitor channel.
By the way, just to add on to it and let Brian talk, you don't even have to have content to start a channel. You could have a great idea. I just worked with someone who wanted to do kind of a environmental lifestyle channel. So I worked with them and we got the content together and put the channel together. So
Well, that's
it
interesting
doesn't,
to see that, because thinking about the people who have 0 to 5 or 5 to 20 or 5 to 50 hours, they're the type of people who can be part of, I guess, a bunch of people inside of a channel. So it's still,
well, they could lead it and put it together and bring other people's content in, or they could find other people who have similar channels to what their content matches and sell it to them. They got 2 choices, but I'll let Brian jump in because.
Well, I actually have a question for Jhod and Matthew and Phoenix, and that is, are there any genres out there that really at the moment aren't terribly attractive for AVOD, SVOD, fast channel exploitation?
great question.
In other words, what about because I've had a tremendous amount of experience in the kids space. What about the kids space? What about the kids genre?
Kids is very tricky because
it's tough.
It's the COPA advertising laws that are in place, which makes kids so difficult. Extremely successful at SVOD because you can get around that. But you're right, that's one genre where we're having in the AVOD space specifically, half of our platforms won't even take kids stuff because of the regulations around it, which is unfortunate, but that's just how it's built.
Right.
I also feel, Matthew, I don't know if you're the same, but it feels like the lifestyle reality space still hasn't really figured itself out. There are some little gems in there, but it just doesn't seem rewatchable or evergreen enough so that I get asked, do you have any travel shows? And I can deliver the travel show, but it just doesn't seem to click the same way that like a true crime would, for example. So that space, I have less value for it.
I can tell you the biggest and first, the least, like news, huge driver. True crime, any crime channel, huge driver. And I think a Hollywood kind of movie channel, those work too. But I think also like what you're talking about, like the unscripted space is really coming into its own now because the guys who owned it, the big studios, weren't releasing it. I think like Brian, I would say you got in at the right time because your brand is known. It's a great name too. It's just a catchy name. And that works in this space, or it sounds like some bigger brand. Not that your brand's not big, but you get what I'm saying. Like that works because bigger brands haven't let their content go out in this space. So having something that sounds catchy or unique, that really works also.
So branding's a really big part of it, is what you're saying, Matthew. Even like if you're creating a new channel, it's still always going to come down to the branding of how
you got to know what you got to make the viewer understand what they're getting, whatever that is.
Interesting.
Yeah, we've kind of brushed over to just the on-demand aspect, and we do make a lot of money on demand. It's not that it's not valuable. There is so much hype in the fast channel right now, whether it's creating your own or getting your content onto them. The ones that do well just generate huge amounts of revenue. However, I do have some shows that are on fast channels, but they're on demand is still
on demand can kill it.
Yeah.
Well, that's good to know, because I think people have a misconception because everything is just so fast driven right now, that they think that, maybe I just want to focus on a fast channel and I don't want to do anything on demand, and they don't even consider on demand anymore for monetization. So I think it's really important that people realize that there's still, depending on, I guess it still boils down to the type of content, right? For on demand.
Yeah, and everything just seems so buzzy right now. We're really following the next buzz, and the gap in between those buzzwords and trends is very short. So it's a little bit of chasing. That it doesn't mean the other is not valuable, but we seem to be chasing the next thing because the technology is changing so quick. It's now you realize you can do other things with it. So I find that can't discount what has already worked, because it still is working. And Matt, you mentioned something too, which I'm really curious how the next couple of years are going to go. The studios haven't released everything yet, so they are just starting to figure out how much money can be made and starting to put resources into it and their
Yeah.
content. So what, like Roku used to be an independent film mecca because no studio was willing to put their stuff up there. But now, as you see, the rails are changing. And for those who aren't familiar with the term rails, it's like basically just the lines of content that you see in any platform.
Yeah.
So what used to just be the top was all horror movies, thriller. Now it's like best of, 20th Century Fox, best, like those studios are starting to take those rails, which means independent content is getting squished lower and lower. So if you're sitting on indie content, I really would recommend, and I have a feeling we all would, you got to get out there now before the studios
Right.
take over.
Yeah.
That's not a great position to be in.
100%. It's
Yeah.
getting tougher and tougher. I mean, Warner Brothers launched 12 fast channels. I mean, they're seeing the opportunity now.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And even places like Roku is becoming a lot more stringent on what content they're taking. They used to just, the floodgates were open, and now the pitch process is more hands-on.
Everybody.
Yeah, you're right. Everyone is. I felt like Roku was the first big one to fall recently.
And that's why people, you look, I think I always say when I work for someone, consult for them, it's their content, it's my relationships with the platforms, and it's our strategy. And those are the three pillars to having success.
Well, that's actually, so in the content space, when people start looking at, do I do fast? Do I do on demand? Like the biggest thing I think people still are grappling with is length of time. Like, what is the right length of content, like the time of each piece of content, whether, let's say, for the on-demand world and for the fast world, like how does that factor into monetization?
I'd be curious to hear from Brian on that, because I'm also curious on Brian, to add to your question, Phoenix, like, do you put a channel together, or you give it to the platform and they put the channel together?
We're putting the channels together.
For Brian?
Oh, Brian does not have a channel.
Okay, it's all content. Got it.
Yeah. It's all on demand or on other fast channels. Yeah, Brian, do you have anything to say? I'll follow. I can follow up too. Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute, Brian.
Excuse
We can't
me.
hear
Other
you.
than, can you hear now?
Yep.
Yeah. Other than we all know the famous, Sumner Redstone content is king quote. And in fact, it is, but it's challenging to get the placement, to build the name recognition, to build the awareness. And I think one of the challenges we're going to see, the disruption that's been happening in the business with AVOD, SVOD, all these platforms, it's also going to start to impact production. And I'll tell you, in my opinion, in what way. I read some interesting research the other day that I'm talking about the youth market now, kids 5 to 14. The United States and Canada spend 91 minutes a day on TikTok and 56 minutes a day on YouTube. And so they're getting acclimated to short form content, right? That's where it seems to me, that's where the marketplace is going, shorter, faster content. So how that impacts the production community will be interesting, because I think, the idea of longer form content, while there's still a marketplace for it, I get it, but the short form stuff is really, I think, is going to start to really take off. So I think I go back to this Dumbest Criminal series, when we produce new episodes, it's going to be for syndication, it's going to be for TikTok, it's going to be for YouTube. We're going to have to cover every platform, every media platform possible in order to monetize it.
Yeah, that is interesting, all the different ways you can. And one of the areas we started to look really closely into is the ad pod revenues, basically all the different platforms have. And this is more in the on-demand space, not the fast channel space, because that's where we got our foothold first. And we started stacking all episodes to a minimum of 22 minutes. And we did that because when we looked at Vizio specs and Plex and Roku's, that's when it started to optimize the amount of ads we could get. There are some regulations where it could be 15 minutes, but then we realized the ad breaks just weren't very beneficial for us. So if someone had 7-minute episodes, we'd suggest stacking 3 of them. So we had the 21, 22 minutes. But that's based on their ad pods. Then the fast world came along and you can kind of get rid of that. I think the flexibility is the big thing right now. And just making sure it's good. I mean, you can't put the fluff because people can change so fast, but the length is very tricky. And how do you want to present it? And are you doing broadcast sale before? Like a lot of broadcast sales still exist, and SVOD doesn't really care if it's exactly 44 minutes or 53, but how do all those decisions translate down the line? And I think it's really, are you cognizant of it? And what are you willing to do afterwards? Did you keep the right pieces in place so you can start to cut it up and monetize 4 or 5 different lengths, and know that if you want, after your broadcast window in 5 years maybe is done, what are you doing after? So I think it's being just cognizant that time frame is starting to be almost thrown out the window, yet there's optimized ways to still use that.
Interesting.
It feels a little incomplete, that statement, but
Yeah, to that end, I think the short form, that you see on TikTok and YouTube, I look at that as a form of sampling.
Yeah.
You're really giving people the opportunity to sample your program, and then you can drive them to other platforms where you can watch the full 22 minutes, whatever,
So discovery happens on those platforms.
Matt, do you have a lot of short form content with your different clients?
Not really. I mean, I think mostly it's been longer form, and sometimes depending on, we have to fill in some time, we'll create some short form, but I think, but short form can work. I've seen examples of short. Look, I think like, AFV has that channel, and it's not really shows. It's just their, fun, which is kind of America's Funniest Video Moments, right? And that works really well. And I also know about a bikini channel that just shows short form bikini stuff, and shockingly that does well. So, and then there's another one I'm thinking, I can't remember the name. So look, I think it's just having good content, whatever that is, that makes sense. It could be short, it could be long. I see a lot more long form working, but I just think that's kind of just because more people have long form stuff. But if you have a ton of short form, it can work.
The lift is pretty similar for long and short. So I think
the lift is similar. You still got to figure out your strategy and put it together and have a technology. I mean, we haven't talked about have a technology partner if you have a fast channel, and then you got to be able to get you got to sell it to the platform. So whether it's short form or long form, you're in the same boat.
Yeah, I think that's why there is also the tendency towards long form, because the lift is the same. And if I have to do the same contract, the same delivery, the same deliverables, and it's 7 minutes, and ads can only run once in 7 minutes versus a 90-minute film, well, it's an easy decision to make when resources are limited in all of us, because we're, this space is growing so fast, we're all pretty stretched right now.
Totally.
Yeah.
Agree.
That's that leads us into, so distribution. What third-party networks domestically and internationally make the most sense? Like, how are you guys working with your clients? And obviously you don't have to share everything, but what's happening domestically versus internationally when it comes to VOD, fast, and the length of content?
I mean, I'll jump in. Like, look, there's a gazillion platforms out there. Let's just talk to the US. Obviously, there's the biggies, the Roku channel and Pluto and Freevee, and I'm missing someone, Tubi and Amazon, right? Like, there's the big ones that you can make. If you get on them, those 5 or whatever, celebrate good times, you're going to get a nice check. But there's some other really, really strong ones like Plex and Vizio and LG and Zuma. I mean, and there's smaller ones. And I think you can't, maybe a smaller one's only delivering a check of $400 a month or $200 a month today. But who's to say that a year from now, they don't figure it all out and they're delivering checks of $10,000 a month. So look, I encourage my clients, if it's not a matter of cost, because, and I don't want to go in the technological distributor, really determines what your cost is going to be for distributing each platform. So if you can keep the distribution cost on the technology partner down, then you can just go for everyone. But if you have one of those technology partners where they're going to charge you per platform, then you really have to be precise and picky of which platforms, because you don't want to get into a position where your technology partner is charging you $1,500 for that platform, but you're only making $100.
Right. So that's
I think that
Go
goes,
ahead.
yeah, I think that goes the same too for on demand, and you can look at it just as your distributor. Do they have the internal capabilities to deliver direct to a platform, or are they using a lab? And if they're using a lab, every time you deliver to a new platform, you're seeing extra fees.
And by the way, on the fast space, if you want to go to a big guy, you really only have you have to choose between Frequency, Amagi, Whirl, Terra, and Zumo. I mean, you could use other ones and they can deliver to the mid to small guys, but the big guys are very fussy. And so you have to pick one of those if you think you're going to get deals done with the bigger guys.
Yeah, it's true.
I mean, Brian, yeah.
You're
I mean, Brian, how do you find, distributing your content? Do you find it just everyone's, what's the key to getting it distributed?
Well, I think it goes back to your point about having you got to have a strategy first and foremost. Is what your objective is. Is it just squeezing whatever revenues you can out of it, or is it to build, renew the brand, et cetera? I know that one of the issues you have is on the technology and the materials delivery. That stuff can kill you sometimes in terms of cost. And it's really, I've had some deals with some of the majors, Netflix, for example, with some children's programming I did with Netflix, where they insisted, and I sold a property in 6 foreign languages, and they insisted that the programs be subtitled. And, I said, well, this is children's programming. They're not reading. We don't care. It's got to be subtitled. Well, by the time you get done subtitling in Japanese and subtitling in all these languages, suddenly you're into the many thousands of dollars in added cost. That kind of stuff, really is, that's troubling. That's really challenging. So you got to really think through carefully in terms of who you work with as a distributor and the costs associated with it, the materials costs. I would get a call and they would say, gee, we noticed on episode 26, 3 minutes and 12 seconds in, there's a technical glitch, there's a hiccup here. And of course I would say, well, that's how it was broadcast in France. Right. Well, we don't care. It's got to be fixed. And the next thing you know, the big license fees you got, it starts getting eroded with all these add-on costs, distribution costs, et cetera. So it's vital when you work with either an aggregator or a distributor, be really careful who you select. I guess
Brian,
is the advice I would give.
Yeah, Brian, some of the content we partnered on, I thought was a nice balance when, there's tech specs required and that are optimal, and then there's tech specs you can get away with. And, we were discussing with your one lab who had the content, and we said, this is, the required tech specs, and the charge was remarkably high. And, we needed someone on our side, on the tech, that could speak to their lab and say, okay, why is this so expensive? And if we do small tweaks, and they were really only small tweaks, but it took us a few weeks to actually boil down why it was, so many thousands of dollars just to deliver a basic digital file, and finding those partnerships on who can speak, whether you have the knowledge yourself or who can speak on your behalf to decrease that expense. I think we keep talking about it is, yeah, with AVOD, you need to keep your expenses low because you don't know what you're getting back until people start clicking.
You're muted, Brian.
I remember that all too, still muted? No. I remember all too well, Jhod, that situation. Because we had materials costs that were 6 times what we're able to do it with you guys.
Wow.
6 times.
Yeah, and that was just
huge difference.
Yeah, conversations about, you know, why, and it was really slight things like, oh, they're on different channels. You requested audio on different channels. Oh, if that's what's creating that cost, then let's just change that structure. But you know, you have to have those relationships with your partners to try and, you know, really be safeguard yourself against those, because yeah, that would have been huge.
Yeah, that is and continues to be a huge headache for a distributor, because I'm dealing with some platforms in Scandinavia, I'm dealing with some platforms elsewhere, and these are really demanding issues regarding materials, delivery requirements, and costs. And you look at it and you have to evaluate it and say, yeah, it's nice to be on the Scandinavian markets, but guess what? I don't think the revenue is gonna cover the costs that they're demanding in terms of material and deliveries. You know?
Well, that brings me to a question that came up for me in everything that you're talking about, and the stat that you brought up, Brian. And it kind of leads into you know, the alternative means of distribution, and like, what are those alternative means of distribution? I think, you know, the US market is obviously saturated. We have, you know, some really strong players in the market. But internationally, you know, I know there's slower adoption in European markets because of cable still being like having a strong foothold, but there are starting to be in LATAM and, you know, in Europe and places like Scandinavia, there's starting to be more opportunities. So what are the alternative means of distribution? And it may not just be OTT, but what are the alternative means? And then let's talk about social after that for a second, because there's some stuff in social I want to ask you guys about. So
well, that's funny, because I was going to say social media, like you can totally use your, you know, can you people monetize on Facebook and Instagram and all those things, and just the web, and also starting your own app. Like, can you make your own app and monetize through that? So I think those are a lot of good alternatives right there to think about and start with. But
so
you guys,
do you suggest to clients that they launch their own applications, or when is the right time? Like,
I think it depends who they are. I mean, there's a lot to go. It's been a yes and no depending who it is. I think, first of all, like what I would say is, if you launch your own app, you better have marketing to bring people there, because no one's going to know about it. So it's much easier if you can get Roku or Vizio or someone to have you, because the eyeballs are already flowing to them. To make them flow to you is a whole nother thing. Now, that's not to say it can't be done, but there has to be certain mechanisms in place to get that done. So it's usually a secondary thing, and, you know, it's something you want to do economically, because if you feel there's enough there, there's enough there.
That's the same for a YouTube channel or Instagram or Facebook, all of that monetization. Can you bring people over to your channel? I have some clients who wanted to test I've suggested, hey, I know some great YouTube channels we can get this on. And they're like, oh, I'd like to do my own. And they can't even monetize because you need, you know, 10,000 plus view hours in a year and 1,500 plus subscribers. So it's not a true test of, is YouTube worth it? I'm like, yeah, but you don't have the base. And if you want to do YouTube, you have to commit to it, or any of these places, to grow it. And do you have enough content continually flowing in, whether it's your own or third-party means, so that you can build it out? And then talking about international too, is the platforms are great because you don't have to do the versioning. And that's where I feel like the next can of worms is international. Is absolutely, I'd love to get on the German version of, you know, some of these on-demand AVOD sites, but now you're versioning your content. And some of those minimums, particularly in Europe, are more stringent. and expensive, and it's still uncertain what those costs, what those revenues will be.
I want to talk a little bit more about that. Just want to let the audience know Q&A is open. So if you have questions, please feel free. This is your time now to ask us questions. I will throw those questions over to our panelists. But Jhod, as you talk about cost, so like, are we talking about like as simple as doing subtitling, or are we talking about like where Netflix goes the whole mile with voiceover? Like, what are we talking about as we start to look at the international market? Brian, you as well, with your library, of content that you're representing, like, what are the things that content owners and library owners are looking at as they start to look at distribution internationally? Because it's one thing to distribute here and have closed captions, right?
Yeah, the elements, they can be, well, it depends, again, the country and the platform, but it can be as simple as changing your poster so that it's in a different language, then all your metadata. So that would be your synopsis and each, series, episode names and titles and all that, if it's applicable, and then subtitling. But, we just looked at, looking at a crime series, 24 episodes, 40-minute episodes, into Spanish, and that's definitely going to run around $15,000.
$15,000?
When you add it all together, it does. So
Wow.
you just have to be certain that it's worth your while. So although the talk is international expansion, sure, but you might start to dip your foot into the water a little differently. Like first you might do a Spanish version, maybe a German version, but to just blow it wide open, that's a lot of versioning, and it's a big lift.
Brian?
I'm gonna raise the question for you, Jhod, and Matthew as well. This is completely, it goes into another whole direction here. What about AI and issues regarding dubbing, subtitling, etc.? Where do you see that going? Because I've heard things about, the potential for AI, but I haven't touched on it yet. But what are you guys hearing?
We're dealing with clients we've had to call out using AI because it hasn't come back clean yet. Now, I think there's a lot of value in it, but what seems to be happening is 100% trust level in it. So they're using it for closed captioning or subtitling files, and then it's like no one proofs it. So then we start to deliver and it starts to get rejected. And as soon as you get in this rejection cycle on a platform, sometimes it's just very painful. So you can see the value in it, particularly the closed captioning is the first time we saw it. But now I can tell very fast if AI is being used for closed captioning and context is missed and character names, or they're not spelling the character name the same way depending on which episode because an AI has just grabbed it. And it just creates these really bizarre red flags, but that will decrease a lot of these costs for versioning. I'm certain of it. It's just the creative team has to still have eyes on it, which right now it's just this bizarre level of trust we're seeing that I'm thinking.
Look, and I would just add what Jhod's saying, like when something's new, you got yourself a deal with Vizio. This is fantastic, right? You're gonna make all this money, and you're like, oh, let's just wing it and try AI and hope it works.
Yeah.
That is not a recipe for success. That's a recipe for Vizio looking at you or whatever platform saying, guys, we made a deal, and you're already not keeping to it. So I always believe, use technologies that are working. When AI can prove to you it works on a consistent enough basis, use it for whatever that's going to be. But, and it's not just for the platform, it's for the consumer. You want to, monetize, you better give the consumer the best experience they can have, because if they're not having the best experience they can have, they're going to turn to the next person who can give them that experience.
Very interesting. Yeah. Like a whole other world. And it's moving so fast. There's a question, like, we know I'm very clear about Brian's lane. Brian's a content owner. He represents a library. He works with technology and distribution, and he works with strategy. So Jhod and Matthew, talk to me about the differences and the collaborations that you guys do with each other, because that to me is where I still feel like people are also missing, like, how do I choose the right provider? And Brian, maybe this is something you can also share, like, how do I choose the right provider? Like, how am I going to manage my library? How am I going to maximize it? How am I going to work with on strategy? Like, how do those things come together, guys?
That's, by the way, I'd say that's exactly what I get hired for. Like, someone wants to start a fast channel or distribute their content. And look, I mean, my background is I ran programming at multiple networks. I started WWE Network, I ran TV Guide Network, I ran Reels Channel. So, you know, having the programming strategy point is helpful, and having the streaming from WWE. So people come to me, sometimes it's like, I have content, like, what can we put together? And how do we put it together? And other times it's like, I know what I'm doing with it, but I don't know how to distribute it. And other times it's like, look, sometimes people just hire me to acquire content. Like, hey, I have this idea, you know, Sports Illustrated, they're like, we need movies and content. So they just hire me to get. So for me, I'm kind of like overall, you know, jack of all trades when it comes to, you know, figuring out your streaming strategy, and can either come in and do the 360 experience for you, or come in and do the piece you need my expertise in, if that's kind of the answer you're looking for.
Yeah. And then Jhod, like, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Matt, I think we're sitting in these chairs because of that jack of all trades experience we have, and we've had our hands in different areas. So over, you know, the last 20 plus years, I've done a variety of things, but I've always been an early adopter in technology, whether it's in the industry or outside of it. So I feel like I'm used a lot of helping people untangle the chaos that's just happening right now. And it's hard to sometimes believe what each person is saying, because it sounds so important or so necessary, until you know, you talk to someone, and you know, Dot Studio has 3,000 hours of content that we're distributing to all these platforms. So I'm seeing a lot of different scenarios of what's working, what's not, both coming, like when it's content coming in to our network, plus when it's going out and how it's monetizing. So being able to speak more confidently on what is working, what's not working. We talked about stacking. I mean, we had a client who they have some YouTube stuff that was doing 1 billion views, but they could not monetize on demand. And that we just changed the stacking technology, the stacking strategy of their actual content, and it changed the course like within a month. So yeah, it depends what the strength is of the person you're talking to, whether they just know how to create incredible content, or
Yep.
have connections that open up every door, and they're like, look, I can introduce you to people with the content. Do you have a pipeline so we can get it out? Because there's a lot of people who are too busy or aren't as active in the industry anymore, because you know, maybe they're towards the end of their career, but they're sitting on these libraries, and they just want sometimes an easy solution to monetize what is sitting right in front of them.
Yeah.
And then others with the strategy of, okay, I'm embracing this AVOD space. I tried to play the first run broadcast game and get onto NBC, and it's brutally hard, but I have great ideas. So it's right now, you know, because software has intertwined so much with the creativity, and then there's the delivery. I think Matthew and I are sitting in that utility person chair going, hey, we're spending all day and evenings trying to sort out this tangled web, and it's starting to become clear, or we have our own visions and strategies of what we think will work, given the last essentially only 5 years of, you know, deep strategy of this.
And by the way, if you need my help, it's matthew.singerman@me.com. That's called a shameless plug right there.
I love the shameless plug.
It's a shameless plug. I also do PR, and I train people and place them on TV, politicians. And so the first thing I always say is, make sure you say your website at some point during your interview. So I can't be the one who doesn't do it. Sorry.
I will at the end of this. I will do a wrap-up email with everyone's information of where to find them and how to communicate with them. So that will definitely, Matthew's shameless plug will come out in a newsletter as well. Brian. I wanted to ask you because very
Yeah,
different
I would,
and Matthew.
and I was, before you asked me, I was just going to say, I try to simplify this whole process and ask myself, do I want to be working with the person who I'm negotiating with, talking to? Can I see myself working with this person over the next 5 years, over the next 10 years? Or is this a short-term transaction? And if it's a short-term transaction, I have a tendency to walk away. I'm more inclined to want to work with people that I can try to see myself working with them over a longer
Great
period
point.
of time. And that's a little bit difficult in the entertainment business, because in the content business, because for all intents and purposes, we're dealing with perishable commodity. It's like fruits and vegetables. It's going to spoil. You don't know when it's going to spoil. Yeah, Dumbest Criminals, I'll come back to it. 26 years, that hasn't spoiled. But the truth of the matter is, most entertainment, ultimately, there's high point, low point, et cetera. So I always look to work with people that I believe that I want to be working with longer term, over 5 years, 7 years, because I might be, for example, working with, I'll use you as an example, Matthew, working with you today, and I believe
This is day one
in
for us,
you, and
Brian.
we have yeah, but we have a good relationship, and I can imagine, I don't know where you're going to be in 5 years, but the relationship's important. And
I'm
I
worried
think
about
much
where
of
I'll
the
be
entertainment
tomorrow,
business
by the way, but 5 years, yes,
I think the relationship is a big part of this business.
100%.
And
But
over
sorry,
my,
go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, over my career, there's many times I moved content globally, and it really was a case of broadcasters saying, okay, I trust you. You've delivered me Pokemon, you've delivered me Ninja Turtles. I'll take whatever you got because I trust you. So it's a big relationship's a big part of it. And that's the recommendation I make. Be careful who you work with, and try to work with people you can see yourself working with.
Okay, Brian muted himself, but thank you for that, Brian. I think it's so important for content owners and content creators to really do vetting of the people that they're working with, or that they're going to choose to work with. And reputation is everything. So, we have we have a couple minutes left. I'd love to hear, outside of the what we've talked about, where you feel like the industry is going. It's moved so fast. What are the things
No
that
pun intended when you say that.
No pun intended. No, but seriously, like, what are the things that people should be thinking about? Trends, things that you've kind of gotten a glimpse of that you feel like is something that,
Look, I think there's going to be new opportunities in the fast space, because I think now the paid places like Netflix,
Yeah.
And the other Max, I think these guys are all going to say, yeah, ads. Everything is old is new again. Like, isn't that how TV started? We'll have TV and we'll place commercials in. And then it's like, Netflix, it's new, subscribe. I'm telling you, all these guys, they see the money in it.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised they're all gonna have, I think, all the subscription ones that don't have channels. I won't be surprised if they start to add channels. And I think original content's coming the fast. I think what you said was super fascinating, how now people want you to do new episodes. And I think there's that opportunity. You get your content out there and it works, they're going to want you to make new episodes.
Well, I think that's a big one for me. Is the offshoot of content that does well, because it's a lot easier to share with the content owner those analytics, the value. And I've had multiple discussions taking older content, or not even too old of content, but restructuring it a little bit differently. A crime show that was doing very well, and it was removing the victim part of it and only concentrating on the detective part. So what was a 45-minute crunched down into 22 minutes. So now you have the full 44 plus the 22. And I think just the iterations of how content can now live, and seeing almost real time what that monetization is like, I feel that's where we're going, is we can react a little more to what's doing well, and what's falling flat. I mean, it's tough when you put something on there and it falls flat, and it's hard to move it once it's flat, even if there was a lot of excitement for it.
Oh, how will you be able to get a recording of this webinar? I'm going to post the recording and I'm going to send a newsletter. So when I send the newsletter, I will send the recording as well. We have 4 minutes left. So I really just want to kind of wrap up just to look back on what we talked about. I think obviously, you know, fast is a really big conversation right now, but the reality is that fast and on-demand syndication of content. So distribution, working with an aggregator to help your content get on a platform. All of those things are very key, but both aspects of the business from fast to on-demand are both still lucrative. We've heard that obviously long form content still is kind of king, but there is a home for short form content, maybe in the fast space more so than the on demand. And that really is because ads dominate the revenue in the industry. I also heard that older catalogs still have, you know, once proven successful, have an opportunity to be revitalized or revisited and create new content. So I think that's an interesting point, something we didn't touch on, and Jhod, you kind of touched a little bit on it. But when you're thinking about creating content moving forward, content owners look to what's out there. What is trending, what is doing well, you know, what genre should you focus on if you're going to be creating new content. When it comes to picking your partners, you know, Brian gave some really sound advice in regards to, you know, reputation and being, you know, doing your vetting process. And Matthew and Jhod really shared a lot of great insight from a technology perspective and a strategy perspective. You kind of both play in a little bit of the same world, but you come at it from different aspects. So it's really important. Guys, is there anything else you wanted to share in this last couple? As we got 2 minutes left, those are just some of the things that I felt like we should make sure to recap for everyone. But are there things you want to share? I want to thank you all for joining today. You really shared some great information with the audience.
I would just say, look, I think it's partly what Brian said, relationships, working with people you trust, working with people smart, coming up with a great strategy and figuring out the best path for you, because everyone's path is different. But whether you have 5 hours of content or 5,000 hours of content, there's a strategy and a way for you to monetize.
I'd like to remind people too that the non-exclusive space, that's where we're really moving towards. So if you've already exploited that first window exclusive, there's a very good chance you're sitting right next into non-exclusive now, and try and get there as fast as possible if you don't have that second window great exclusive deal, because the environment's changing quick. So yeah, I'd react and try and find a partner soon.
Great. Brian, is there anything you feel like you want to share? You come with a lot of wisdom and knowledge. You've been doing this, you know, a long time with some really
I'll
good.
follow up with Matthew Singerman.com, LaceyEnt.com. We got it in. Okay.
Awesome. And I'm just going to do a shameless plug then, because I am one of the co-founders of dotstudioPRO. A little bit about us in the last minute is we came from distribution and production. So all of the executives in our company have a firsthand knowledge and experience in production, post-production, distribution. And so, you know, dotstudioPRO as a platform is really here to support the content owner in their journey of managing their library of content, monetizing it, going direct to consumer, as well as third-party distribution. So if you need any information or feel like reaching out, you will get an email as a thank you follow-up with the link to this webinar and everyone's information. Have a wonderful weekend, and thank you so much all for joining. Ciao for now. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.